Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Meet Gradescope webinar. We're thrilled to see such a great turnout. Turnitin is excited to welcome Gradescope into our portfolio, further expanding our commitment to optimizing assessment workflows. My name is Leslie Briggs. I do product marketing at Turnitin, and beside me in our Oakland, California office is Arjun Singh. I'll be here to field any questions, so please ask them in the question box in GoToWebinar. We encourage your participation and we'll be sure to raise questions with the team throughout today's webcast. Again, thank you for joining. Take it away, Arjun.
Thanks, Leslie. Hi, everyone. I'm Arjun. I'm excited to have you all join for the webinar. I appreciate you taking the time to join. And today we got done with introductions already, but we're here to tell you about Gradescope, and particularly Gradescope in the context of Turnitin. We joined about a month and a half ago now, and we're really excited about everything that's happened so far. I'm going to go through a quick overview of that, and I'll dive into a pretty comprehensive demo of the Gradescope platform after that. And as Leslie mentioned, just want to emphasize, please do feel free to ask any questions using the question box. So if you're not familiar, Gradescope is the leading assessment and feedback platform. And we're working on modernizing the grading process so we can transform what is time spent on grading into time spent on learning, essentially. So feedback and assessment is sort of one of the most critical things in education. It's also one of the most painful things. If you pick any instructor and you ask them kind of what their least favorite parts of their job are, the vast majority of them are going to tell you it's grading. It's just a sample of kind of the sentiment that you're going to find if you look for grading online. So it's this thing that instructors don't like doing, but it's critical to provide quality feedback. It's time consuming. And one of the kind of my favorite pieces of feedback I've gotten about Gradescope is we've almost made grading fun. And sometimes it's actually fun. We'll talk about that. We got started in 2014 in the computer science department at UC Berkeley. We were working on solving our own needs, scaling the computer science program. I was a teaching assistant for a 250 student course that grew to 750 students over a couple of years. And we wanted to make sure that we kept up the quality of assessments, particularly exams and midterms and finals and things like that, while doing it in kind of scalable fashion. We quickly got to a few million answers graded, and now we're at about 70 million answers with over 400,000 active users this year. In early October, we joined Turnitin, and we're excited to be part of the family because now we're able to offer authentic assessment for every type of assignment. What does that actually mean? If you're familiar with Turnitin Feedback Studio, it's a great tool for grading things like essays and presentations and similar types of things. And with Gradescope, we can help on assessments that are common in STEM courses and similar. So things like in-class exams that are taken on paper. It could be a programming assignment where students are typing up code and submitting that. It could be a problem set or a lab report or anything. So, with kind of both products, we essentially have a solution for giving students high-quality feedback on any type of assignment. So why is giving students feedback and assessing them actually challenging? So one is it's just extremely time consuming. It's hard to be consistent, and this is kind of triply hard in a large course where you have multiple graders involved. One of the critical parts of assessment is understanding what is telling you about your students and your teaching. Where do students need help? So how do you pinpoint knowledge gaps? Data security is also an issue, particularly for the in-class exams. There's academic integrity issues of students modifying work and also handing the results back to them securely. And then lastly, there's all sorts of learning tools being used, and it's critical to be able to integrate with existing systems. So Gradescope addresses all of these needs. Chiefly, we reduce grading time. But for every single thing here, we help in a pretty substantial way. And as we dive into the demo, I'll show you exactly how we do that. So let's get started there. So this is the Gradescope web application. And I'm going to start in the middle of the process, which is actually grading student work and giving them feedback and a score. I'm going to show you this on a quiz that was taken in class. The work was taken on paper. It was digitized, and it was scanned in and uploaded, and we are now grading it. And I will show you how we get the work into the system a little bit later, but this is where users spend the vast majority of the time on Gradescope looking at student work. So on the left here, we have a math question. What is the integral of x? And the student handwrote on this paper 1/2 x squared plus c. If I zoom out, you'll notice that this is in fact a sheet of paper that got scanned in. But we're focusing on just this one question at a time. On the right, I have my rubric, which is my primary way of giving students feedback and a score. One thing that's unique about Gradescope is that our rubric is meant to be dynamic, meaning that if you, for some types of assignments, it can be much easier and more effective to build your rubric on the fly as you see how your students are responding to the question. For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to show you this on-the-fly method. If you know how you want to build your rubric ahead of time, that's also possible. So this student's answer is correct. And I have a single entry in my rubric currently that says -0 for correct. So I'm going to click on this box and I'm applying this rubric item to this answer. And they get 3 out of 3 because they get full credit because it's correct. This one's pretty simple here. So I'm just going to go to the next button here. And when I hit next, it takes me to the next student's answer to this question. So it's making it very simple for me as the grader to go through all of question 1.1 before I look at question 1.2. This both reduces grading time and also dramatically increases consistency as well. This student here has a different answer. They forgot the 1/2 in front of the x squared, and my rubric does not currently address this mistake. So I'm going to add an entry to my rubric that says forgot 1/2. I'm going to say that this mistake is worth 2 points. I'm going to apply it. And now the student has a 1 out of 3 because I took up 2 points for this mistake. I'm done with this one, so I'll hit next. And I'm at the next student's answer to the same question. And if you look at the rubric, you'll see that that mistake is still here. So the next time I see a student forget the 1/2, I don't need to type anything out again or think about how many points it's worth. I can just choose it from the list of rubric items and apply it. This one's correct. Go to the next one. We have another new mistake here. The student forgot the constant, the plus c. We'll take off 2 points. There's also keyboard shortcuts for nearly everything on the grading page here, which is also a big boost in how much time you spend. So if I hit the number 3 on the keyboard, it'll apply the third rubric item. If I hit it again, it'll unapply it. So I'm going to hit 3, and I'm going to hit right arrow, and it takes me to the next student's answer. This student forgot the 1/2, so I hit 2 on the keyboard. They forgot the plus c, I hit 3 on the keyboard. And I've taken off 2 points for each of these mistakes. And so now the student has a 0 out of 3. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, the student got the x squared, which is a really important part of the answer to this question, the integral of x. And my current grading scheme is giving them a 0. And I'm realizing that I'm being a little bit too harsh here. So what I can do is I can change these point values associated with any rubric item at any point in time. I can make this be worth 1 point. I can make this be worth 1 point. And now the student got a point back. And if I hit back to go to the previous student, they also got a point back. So it's retroactively updating the score for every single student based on my modifications to my rubric. And from personal experience as a TA, one of the most miserable moments is when you're halfway through grading and your professor or you realize that you need to change how you're evaluating this question, and you have to go back and regrade everything. The flexibility of the rubric here eliminates the vast majority of the cases where that has to happen, it's really nice, again, from personal experience. So at this point, my rubric is essentially set up. This one's just blank. I'm going to say that's worth no credit, hit 4 on the keyboard. And now it becomes pretty quick and easy to go through and give my students detailed feedback about how they did and why they got the score they got without having to repeat myself. So I'm just able to go through and really easily apply the rubric items. The students will see the rubric and how it was applied to them, and so they'll understand why they get a 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3. So although the rubric is the primary form of giving feedback, there are more options as well. Sometimes you want to be able to write directly on the paper itself, and there's a couple of options for that. There's this text tool here, which lets me just type on the page. I can say, this is where the plus C should go, And this is where the 1/2 should go. If you're familiar with LaTeX for math notation, you can use that as well. And I'll render the math really nicely for the student. There's a pen tool that works pretty well when you're on a tablet. I'm on my touchpad here, and I can't really write with it at all, so it looks kind of ugly. But on a tablet, that can be a quite useful tool. So that's a pretty quick overview of the basic form of grading on Gradescope. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to show what happens when you're done grading. So we haven't graded everything for this assignment, but let's pretend that we are. We're going to go to what we refer to as the review grades page on Gradescope. And what you see here is an overview of the score so far. When you're done, you'll see a kind of a more meaningful chart here. And on this page, I have a few different options. One of them is to release the work to my students and notify them that their work has been graded. And so I have the ability to customize the email that the students receive. And it contains no private information here, but it does have a link for them to log in and view their work. And so I'm going to flip over to my student tab now, and I'm going to refresh this, and I'm going to show you exactly what the student would see. So now I'm logged in as a student, and I get to see the work on the left and a list of questions on the right. I see that I got full credit here. And if I click on a question, I see the entire rubric by default. There's some customization there. And I see which items in the rubric were applied to me. So again, this is where the students get to see exactly how they're evaluated. They have the additional transparency of the rubric that they often don't get in these paper settings. It reduces some of the uneasiness that students often have around, was I graded the same way as my friend? And it also has the ability to let the student request a regrade if they think that there was a mistake made. This is an optional feature that the instructor can choose to enable or disable. But let's say, on this question here, I got full credit here, so there's not a whole lot to say. But let's say I want to request a regrade, and I want to say, please take one more look at my answer to this question. Generally speaking, students will provide a little bit more feedback about why they want to be looked at again, but I don't have a whole lot to say here. So I hit request a regrade. And if I go back to my instructor window, I have a list of all of the requests that have been made on this assignment here. If I click on review, it drops me right back into the grading page, and I can see their request. If I need to adjust any of the grading, I can do so. And I can also respond to the student and say, this question was graded correctly. And the student will see this response and be notified. So what I want to do next is show you how you set this up. I'm going to go back to the course dashboard, and I'm going to go to the assignments page for my course. And really quickly, before I dive into the creating an assignment, there's a question in the chat here about whether the regrade option can be turned off. And yes, the regrade option is completely optional. You as the instructor can choose whether it's enabled for every single assignment. You can also enable it for a window of time. So you can say, I only want to open from Wednesday to Friday, and then it'll be disabled on Friday automatically for you. Fully optional. So here, I'm going to create a new assignment. Oops. And I just need to pull up my example here. And so to create a test on Gradescope, the first step is to upload a blank copy of your test. This is the same PDF that you'd print out and make copies of and hand out to your students in class to take their exam. Here's my blank copy. And I'm going to say this is called demo midterm number 2. It's going to ask me whether the instructor will upload the work or whether the student will upload the work. For a homework assignment or a take-home exam or something similar, it'll be the student. For an administrator exam, where you want to make sure that you can ensure the integrity of the exam, you do that as the instructor here. So at this point, I need to label the exam here with the regions on the page where everything is. So where the students write their name, where do they write their ID number, and where is each question. So here's question 1, here's question 2, and so on. Once I have the regions labeled, I can tell Gradescope this question is called integrals. It's worth 3 points. This question is derivatives. It's worth 3 points. And if I want, I can organize them into a hierarchy. So if I have question 1.1 and 1.2, I can group those together as well.
Hey, Arjun, we've got a question around the ability to do a math test that's done online. The example that you've been talking about is a paper test. Can Gradescope be used for grading a math test that's conducted online?
Yeah, so there's a few different options we have for that, and I'll dive into that just a little bit later in the demo, but I'll make sure I touch on it. You can either have it done digitally, where the students type it up as a PDF, or submitting directly into Gradescope. And again, I'll dive into more detail in just a little bit here. I think there's one more question that I'll address real quick about the rubric here. Let me get to it in just a moment, actually. I'm just going to finish one more thing on this page. So what I've done is I've told Gradescope what's on the exam, where is it, where the students write their names, and how many points is it worth. Then I'll hit save. At this point, my exam is set up on Gradescope, and I'd give it out like I normally would. I'll scan the work in. We highly recommend scanning the work in batches, so not page by page or even exam by exam, but as many full submissions as will fit in the scanner all at once. So here's an example of a PDF that has multiple exams in it. I'll upload that. And what Gradescope's doing right now is actually going through and processing these exams to split it up into the individual exams automatically. While it does that, I'm going to go back to the grading page here and address a couple of questions about the rubric. So here, one of the questions was, can the rubrics be additive rather than subtractive? And so the way we refer to this in Gradescope is negative scoring or positive scoring. Negative scoring starts from full credit and takes off points for mistakes. Positive scoring starts from 0 and awards points for various criteria that you want your students to achieve. You can set this question by question. You can set it assignment by assignment or for the entire course. You can mix and match. You can even have negative rubric items in a positive rubric and vice versa. It's extremely flexible in that way. Really, the only distinction is, do you want to start from full credit or do you want to start from 0? And we have a pretty even split amongst instructors for how they use this. There's another question here about whether the assignment input is format agnostic. And yes, it's extremely format agnostic. You can use, let's just go back to this page here. So I'm going back to my demo midterm number 2. The only thing that you need to do is just tell Gradescope what's where. So you can format this however you want. It's very format agnostic. We have some best practices that we shared on the website and happy to answer questions about, but generally speaking, people are able to use their existing exams. So as I mentioned earlier, the system went through and automatically split up that batch of submissions into individual submissions here. And in addition, it also went through and automatically labeled which exam belongs to which student. So I had previously uploaded a roster of my students, and that can be done either by LMS integration or by uploading a spreadsheet. And so Gradescope went and read that this is Hilda's exam and the student ID number that Hilda had. This is Byron's exam, and so on. And it automatically was able to match those up against the roster. And so all you have to do is set up the exam, tell us what's where, upload the scans, and from that point on, we automate for over 90% of exams, the splitting and the labeling. So at this point, you'd go into grading just as I showed you previously. You'd return the work to your students. There's a couple more things that I want to show about reviewing the work and understanding how your students did. So this is kind of addressing the idea of pinpointing knowledge gaps. So I'm going to go back to my demo midterm from before. I'm going to go to the statistics page for this assignment. And I'm going to look at the statistics for question 1.1, which is one we're looking at earlier. So at a glance here, I can see that about a third of my students got full credit, and almost a fifth of them got a 0. And if I scroll down, I can see exactly why the scores turned out the way they did. And what I mean by that is I can understand exactly how frequently each entry in the rubric was applied to each of my students. So this tells me that forgetting the constant, forgetting the plus C was the most common mistake. Almost half my students made that mistake. I should probably address that next time I see my students. Or maybe the next time I teach this course, I might want to emphasize that a little bit more before the first exam. So this now gives a feedback loop for the instructor where they can understand exactly where students need the most help. If I click on this item, it'll even take me to a page where it shows me all of the submissions that had I forgot plus C. So it shows me that Chad and Charles and Rose and so on made that mistake. And I can go and actually see exactly what their work was. We can also do some more holistic kind of understanding of what students did. So not down to the exact question level or the exact rubric item level, but on the exam as a whole. So here, looking at data derived from a real exam, and we can see that the average score was about 60%. That's what this line represents. On these 3 questions, students did better than the average. And on these questions over here, students did actually quite a bit worse than the average. You also see that there's an effect where the later question is in the exam, the worse the student did. And so that actually indicates that the test was potentially a little bit too long. In this example, the instructors went through and labeled the questions of the exam with concepts. You can also use learning objectives or learning outcomes or any arbitrary tag you might want to tag your question with. And then you can flip into tag view and get a breakdown of how students did by tag. So in this case, students did pretty well on environment diagrams, and they didn't do so well on recursion. So this lets you get another view of how your students are doing. So you get a sense of, not just by each individual rubric item or question, but by topic. It also tells you kind of how many points are associated with each topic. So, in recursion, there's only 4 points in one question. That's a pretty noisy measurement of my students. Whereas on environment diagrams, there's much more allocated to it. So I don't necessarily want to take too much away from recursion on this. It might have just been one really difficult question.
Arjun, we've got a question on group projects. Can Gradescope allow students to give peer marks in a group project?
So there's a couple things there that I want to address independently. So there's idea of group projects or group assignments on Gradescope, and then there's idea of peer evaluations there. So Gradescope does support group assignments, and those could be administered by the instructor or by the student. So if I'm a student and I'm working with a couple of partners on my homework assignment, I can submit one assignment for all 3 people in the group that gets graded one time with a shared score for everybody. We do not currently have functionality for students to evaluate each other, either in the context of a group or do peer evaluation of the work itself. The peer evaluation of the work is on our radar there and something we're looking at to add into Gradescope at some point. It's also a good segue to just kind of mention a little bit about how we decide what to work on the Gradescope product. We have a public roadmap where we take input from all types of users, administrators, students, and faculty. You can see which things that are likely to be worked on in the near future, what things we're currently working on right now, what's been released recently, either in beta or as a fully functional feature. And we really, nearly everything we build is sort of driven by this user feedback. We're extremely driven by user feedback here. And so you even see here, student peer grading is one of the things here, and there's a good bit of traffic around it and good bit of interest there. So just wanted to share that, everything we do is based on what our users want us to do, and it's really great to hear kind of these types of requests in this webinar as well. We've got one more question there. What's that one?
We have a question on analytics. Can you capture analytics on student performance on whole program learning outcomes, not just assignment or course learning outcomes?
Yeah, so let's go back to the statistics page here, this one. So we are able to help you populate your course with whatever outcomes you might want. So whether they're course specific or assignment specific or whole program. So in this particular course, these are the tags I had in there. But if you had for your department a set of program outcomes, you can let us know that, supply us with those outcomes, and we'll have them automatically show up in this drop-down list for every course. And so then you can make sure that the things are being tagged consistently across all courses and all assignments in the program and be able to get data out that you can analyze further. So we do support that. I think there's a couple more questions that came in. Do you mind sharing those?
We've got the question again around grading for math tests that are conducted online.
Sure, so let's dive into that now. So what I've shown you so far is just kind of one mode of using Gradescope in, which is this paper exam thing. We have a few different things that we support in Gradescope. We support bubble sheets for Scantron alternatives. We support homework assignments where the students submit the work themselves. So that homework assignment that the students support could be an exam. It could be typed up where the students are responsible for generating a Word document or a PDF document and submitting that. And then you submit those PDFs into Gradescope. Or you could have an online assignment as well. So for the online assignments, my demo online assignment currently has a single question in it, which is a multiple choice question here. I can also add in a second question that is just free response. And I can ask my students to supply, what is the integral of x? And I can still apply math notation here. And with all those integrals, have that worth 3 points and hit save. And I'll go back to my student window here and then go back to the course dashboard. And I'll go to my demo online assignment. And now I'm the student and I can answer this question. I can be presented as a multiple choice question that is graded automatically, or as an open-ended question where here I can provide my response and say, I can do LaTeX here as well. X squared plus C. There's no requirement of them using this notation, but if you want it, they can do it that way. And so this is how you can support that use case here as well. For math, what we've seen is typically you either use the multiple choice version of this, or you allow your students to submit on paper. So let me just show you that as well. So here, I've got this homework assignment. I have a PDF that I'm going to upload here. And this is my submission. And again, this is a toy example that has, a few different things in it, but one of them is a math question where I showed some work on paper and I've got my final answer drawn here. And so this is taken potentially remotely, done on paper. The reason why this math work is often done on paper is because not every student has math notation or has the knowledge beyond how to input math notation. And so if your students do, great, you should use the online version of it or the multiple choice version of it. If you want to see their work and their thought process and have this complex notation, it might be easier to just have them submit and upload on paper. And it's flexible and you can pick and choose however you want to do it. Okay, so I gave you a quick preview of kind of how students submit homework here. We've talked about exams and returning work and reviewing the statistics. What I want to do next is show another bit of functionality on grading those kind of open-ended exams even more efficiently. So I'm sorry for digging around my tabs. They're opening up a few more. There we go. So what we showed you earlier was grading every single answer, every question one by one. And when you start grading a question, you're able to choose whether you grade one by one, as I showed you, grading individually, or to form groups of answers first. When you form groups of answers, there's a couple of options here. I'm going to show you the first one of these here, which we'll refer to as manual grouping. And what happens here is we just throw all of the answers your students provided on one screen and click on things that should be treated identically. So these are all blank. These people here answered x squared. Here's some correct answers. Here's another blank one. Then I'm going to put the blank ones here. Here's some people that forgot the 1/2. Forgot the plus C. The correct one. And if there's some things that don't have a group to go with, I can just leave them on their own here. And I click grade, and it tells me I'm going to grade 5 groups of answers and 2 things individually. And when I go to the grading page, it's very similar to what I saw before, except now I'm grading groups at a time. So I'm grading 4 blank answers all at once by saying these are all blank. Grading a correct one here. Grading just the ones that are at the half and the constants, constant. And here's the individual one. This person forgot the half and the constant again, just a constant. And so in a large class, you can go through and provide feedback consistently to everybody that had the exact same answer without having to repeat yourself. And so that, again, it touches on both the consistency aspect and the time-saving aspect. We also have the ability for some types of questions, I'm going to reset this here, to generate those groups for you automatically. Today, this works on multiple choice questions, math questions with a kind of a short line of math, or text questions with a few words. And what we're doing here is going through and reading the student's handwriting, as we did with the names previously, and saying, hey, all of these students wrote the x squared. So I'm going to click on it, and I see people that just wrote x squared. I want to emphasize here that we're not automatically grading anything. We still have an evaluator looking at every single student's answer. We're just making their job easier here. So we're not trying to replace the instructor here by any means. We're not trying to automate the feedback the students get. We're trying to make it easier to be consistent and efficient. So the job that I have as the evaluator right now is just to look at all of these and say, yes, in fact, those are all x squareds. The grouping is correct. These are all the same thing. These are all the same thing. Those are all the same again. If the system were less confident about one of these, it would have highlighted it in red here. In this case, it wasn't. So if there's something that doesn't belong in a group, I can just click on it or remove it from the group here. And lastly, here's a case where there is a thing highlighted in red. Let's pretend that it's incorrect and remove it from this group. And then I see everything that the system did not know what to do with or that I took out of a group. Just as before, I can manually group things together.
We've gotten a few questions, Arjun. One of them is around how does Gradescope cope with bad handwriting that it can't recognize?
Yeah, so if Gradescope cannot recognize the handwriting, then it's just going to leave it for you on the page I showed you here. I grouped everything already, but on the ungrouped page, and I'll leave it to you to decipher the student's handwriting. I will also say that Gradescope was trained on student handwriting, and so it's actually pretty surprising what level of bad handwriting it can deal with at this point. There are cases where it can do a better job deciphering it than you might be able to at this point. There's also cases where you're necessary, so I don't want to kind of overstate it or anything, but you might be surprised by how well it does sometimes.
We have another question about if a student's answer does not fit inside the specified box or the area designated, can you enlarge it per submission?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we should talk about with that. So one is grading individually. So grading individually, I can just zoom out and I can see the whole page. I can even see any other page if they wrote on the back of the sheet or added some scratch paper. There's no issue in the grading individually version of this. You can see everything. When you're talking about the handwriting recognition, what we recommend is you kind of select the entire area where they might write here. And if it's possible to have a region where they write their final answer, as in this case, you leave a box for them. So here's some of those formatting best practices. There's no requirement of this, but it'll help you to say, hey, this is where you should write your final answer to this question. Then on the review page over here, I'm able to specify to Gradescope that although I'm looking at the larger area to see their work and see anything they might have written as scratch work, Gradescope should only read the final answer out of this box here. And now when I go to review the grouping, it's grouping based on just the final answer, but I can see their entire set of work here. And I can also kind of zoom out and see the full pages written down if I need to kind of, for one submission, see even more than the larger box.
Will Gradescope support images? Instead of scanning a paper or a handwritten math equation, can students take a photo and submit?
Yes, they can. So for submitting homework, let's click on this again. There's a choice to either submit images or to submit a PDF. So if you have photos that a student took with their smartphone or a camera or anything, you can just go and submit those, and they'll pick which images correspond with question 1, which images correspond with question 2, and which ones go with question 3. So this enables the instructor to go through grade question by question efficiently without having to dig through the 15 images my students might have submitted and figure out which question goes with which image. And we also have some best practice guides for how to help your students submit legible either scans or images that you can provide them in your course. So you can make sure that what's being submitted is high quality.
Speaking of guides, what training is available for teachers to learn Gradescope?
Yeah, so that actually touches on some of the stuff we're going to get to towards the end of just action items. But I'll say that we have a lot of things available. There's a getting started guide on Gradescope here, which has a series of 2 to 4 minute videos that go through each different part of Gradescope. You can pick and choose which one's relevant to you. There's a help center that has fairly exhaustive written documentation about every part of each workflow, whether it's managing a course, what students do, how to manage different types of assignments. Very exhaustive here. And as I'm going to get to again in a little bit, you can also request a demo. So there's this get a demo button here, and you can get in touch. We tailor demos to kind of specific use cases, but that's another option you have here if you want training. If we're talking about institutional license, where a school is getting started with a license or even a pilot, one of the things that we always include in there is making sure that we train instructors and provide trainings for the instructors and administrators to make sure that those licenses are used effectively. And so there's lots of different options depending on what you're looking at. Cool. Okay, so we covered grading in groups and how we can use Gradescope to automatically generate groups for you. And there's one more thing that I want to touch on just briefly here, which is how you can use Gradescope to collect and give feedback on code. So what you can do here is you can provide both automated and manual feedback on code. So the idea is you have a project, the students are typing up code and submitting it. On the left here, instead of seeing an image, I see the student's code and it's highlighted. I can leave comments on it, and I can use my rubric to provide feedback. Generally speaking, instructors will use it to provide stylistic feedback. I can also have the students go back to my student dashboard. Submit their code and get automated feedback. So what I'm going to do here is submit an incorrect solution to this project. And what's going to happen is it's going to run the test cases that the instructor set up on Gradescope in real time. The students will get feedback immediately. They'll be able to take that feedback and iterate on their work and try again until they get the score they're happy with. There's a lot of customization available here, so students don't have to expose everything so instructors don't have to expose everything to the student in real time. They can hold back some set of test cases, and it'll come back with the results here in a couple of seconds here. This works with any programming language that runs in a Linux environment. And so here we saw the feedback. This is a Python project here, and the job of the student was to write a calculator where the student takes input 1 plus 1 times 8, and it's supposed to output 16 or 9. It's supposed to output 9 here. But my program output 16 because I implemented it incorrectly. I would go fix it, I'd resubmit, and I'd see that my fix succeeded. So again, I won't get into too much more detail than this because I know we've got a pretty large mix of people on this call. But if this is of interest, please do let us know. We can, again, set up a more in-depth demo of this part of Gradescope for you so you can understand how this can help your whole computer science program.
Hey, Arjun, will Gradescope be integrated with Turnitin? Will it work alongside GradeMark?
So today, there are 2 standalone products by one company. We're looking at different ways to integrate them in the future. There is one integration that's happening in the very short term, which is specifically for code. So Turnitin has been working on a new product for providing similarity detection for programming assignments, and that is being integrated very soon with Gradescope. So students can submit into Gradescope, and the instructors and administrators will be able to see the similarity reports for code. We're exploring further integrations down the line, and we'll keep you posted as those develop.
Is there a limit of files on the bulk upload?
No, there's very few limits. I mean, we recommend, so just to be clear, when I say bulk upload here, I'm referring to the upload of the scans. There's limits in very few places, but if you're not referring to this, please let us know. So here I can upload as many files as I want all at once, and those files can be, I think up to 250 megabytes for the scans here. We recommend sort of scanning as many exams that'll fit in your scanner and keeping that as each individual batch. So if you have a scanner that fits 500 pages, your exams are 10 pages long, you'll have batches of 50. And you just kind of keep those together and you upload all of those here. Great. So one other thing that I realized would likely be helpful is just to show a little bit more detail about how this looks in a few different disciplines. So we are more focused on STEM and similar disciplines here. So STEM plus things like business and econ and some of the social sciences as well, psychology and sociology, some language courses. But just to kind of show the breadth of how people use Gradescope. So for computer science, you have a simple code thing written on paper here, or a programming assignment. And these rubrics get pretty intense and pretty complicated and quite detailed. Here's a physics assignment where I don't understand what's going on here myself, but there's a lot of work being shown and a lot of partial credit being given. There's a math assignment here. One thing that's pretty interesting is when people make the rubrics actionable. And so this is a good example of that type of rubric. So it's not just telling the student, you got the score and here's why. There's also helping them think about how they arrived at that answer and where they might want to go if they didn't get full credit to learn how. And so we have some people that actually include links to lecture videos or lecture notes in the rubric items. And that's been one of the things that we've heard really positive feedback from students, because it made what sometimes a negative experience of getting your scores and feedback back into a positive experience that's actionable. Just going to flip through here. Here's an essay question in the biology course, fairly complicated engineering diagram, and a curve in economics. And this is just available on our homepage if you're curious and want to flip through this. If any of you have any questions about how different settings, again, please feel free to either reach out in the chat or by email as well. So there's a question in there, just, this all sounds pretty interesting, but like what could go wrong? Like, where are there issues potentially? So I think the biggest thing that I would just encourage is when you start scanning work, if you have 100 students in your class and you're using a scanner for the first time and you're not necessarily experienced with it, you scan one thing and you make sure that it's legible before you scan all 100 of them. And again, we're happy to be very involved here. So if you're like, hey, I'm brand new to Gradescope, I'm brand new to scanning my exams, can you walk me through how to do this really well? Email us to help@gradescope.com, you explain your situation, and we'll make sure you have a very good first experience. But that's kind of my key thing is like, by and large, we've sort of built into Gradescope a lot of different things to handle the issues the instructors might experience. The one thing that we cannot control is the input that comes into Gradescope. And so we just encourage that before you spend, 20 minutes scanning 100 exams, you scan one, make sure you can read it, and then you go and scan the rest of them. Cool. So we've gone through the pretty much everything here. I think I'm going to kind of keep seeing questions trickle in, so we'll stay around and keep answering questions here. Question that came in just now is, for essay type questions, do we have to first use Turnitin, the similarity report, and then toggle to use Gradescope? And the response is that yes. Currently, again, those are two separate systems, and Gradescope submissions are not yet integrated with the similarity report Turnitin. That is an integration that will likely happen in the near future, but we haven't kind of scheduled that into the roadmap just yet. So there's no committed timeline on that just yet. But yeah, so that will be an easier experience in the not too distant future. Right now, if that's a critical part of your workflow, Feedback Studio is likely the easier tool to use for grading that type of thing today. And honestly, for essays, for like, a 10-page essay, Feedback Studio is likely the better tailored tool for that type of use case anyways. The place where it gets a little more ambiguous is if you have one question that's an essay response and then other open-ended work. That's where the integration will help a lot. There's a question that came in around what types of institutions I'm working with. Is it universities only, or is it K-12 as well? We are open to working with everybody. We have users across the board, obviously. So the one thing that I will say is we are currently integrated with more systems that are in higher ed than we are in K-12. So we're integrated with all of the major learning management systems in higher education. Whereas in K-12, we're a little earlier on that piece. Please do reach out. We're happy to sort of understand your current situation in K-12 and see if we already have everything you need or if there's something more we need to add in before a full-on institutional deployment makes sense.
We've got about 15 minutes left, so if there are any additional questions, please don't be shy. We would love to make sure that you get all of your questions answered before we wrap up today's webinar.
So while questions continue to come in, I will just say, there's a few of the questions are starting like, okay, what do we do now? Like this looks interesting, but how do we get started? Either individually as an instructor or as an institution. So I'll say if you're an instructor, you should just sign up at Gradescope for a free instructor account. You can get started with a limited trial of this without doing any other work. You just go to gradescope.com, you hit sign up, and there's a box there that's called the invite code. Just use the code MEET-GRADESCOPE for this webinar, and you'll get approved with an account immediately. And there'll be some work in there for you, some demo work in there, so you can try out the features of Gradescope without needing to go scan anything yourself. You should feel free to get started on your own actual work though as well. If you're interested as an institution, go to gradescope.com and hit request a demo as an administrator, and we'll set up a call to kind of understand the needs of your institution and give you a more customized demo, including LMS integration and similar. So we have a few more questions that just came in here. So one question here is, how big have the cohorts been on Gradescope? Has it been used in subjects that have more than 1,000 students? And the answer is yes. So again, we got started here when I was a teaching assistant at Berkeley. And at Berkeley, the biggest courses has been used with so far is 2,500 students. And so the range of course sizes has been 5 to, I think, 2,500 essentially. And it'd be able to go further than 2,500 as well. So for any sort of in-person setting, there's no concerns about scalability as far as cohort sizes go. 1,000 students is surprisingly some of our smaller, not smaller courses, but not stretching the limits at all. The next question is, what's Gradescope's emphasis? Is it speeding up grading or providing feedback or holistic reporting? And the answer is it's sort of all of them. The way we see this is there's a lot of problems that exist in giving students feedback and assessing them. And a lot of that is driven by the common paper-based workflows. It's hard to give good feedback on paper. It's hard to give good reporting on paper. It takes forever on paper. And the same is true even if it's digital as well. It's open-ended work. And so what we do is we make it really easy to go through and give students high-quality feedback consistently. You're able to spend more time on the feedback because you're not repeating yourself. And essentially for free, you have this detailed log of how frequently each item in the rubric was applied to your students. Now you get this reporting out of it. And so we're trying to, we're essentially finding wins across all three of those things. I will say that if you're just talking into an instructor who's overwhelmed with, 1,000 student courses that the previous participant had asked about, the time saving is probably your most burning need. If you're talking about a 10-student course, you're probably more interested in providing better feedback and getting a more holistic view. And it sort of helps you do what's most important to you. The next question here is about integration. So is this integrated by LTI or is it kind of linking outside? And so there's a few things here. So we have an LTI component that makes it really easy for instructors and students to launch into Gradescope. But the work is often done outside of the LMS. So we don't usually embed it within LMS, but you'll link out to it. And the reason is just that, when you're looking at student work, there's especially on a more complex problem, you want to be able to have the full screen. And so we spend a lot of time just making sure you have as much real estate to work with as possible. We also use the API of Canvas to integrate to make the integration as seamless as possible. So it's not exclusively LTI. But those integrations are quite popular. The other question that came with that was, is this compliant from an accessibility standpoint? And the answer is yes. If you're in the US, it's WCAG AA 2.0 compliant, which is what the ADA requires. And that's not just for US customers, but from an ADA compliance perspective, that we meet that. There's no class size restriction. So the question here is there's class size restriction. there's no restriction there. And again, we've had courses up to 2,500, probably even higher, but the one I'm aware of is 2,500. The next question here is around the integration again. So does the LTI thing just send the final grades to the Grade Center? Is it LTI 2.0 compliant? And can it cope with groups in the LMS? So today, the integration does three primary things. It helps you get your roster out of the LMS into Gradescope. So I have this with Canvas, but again, this can be any of the major LMSs here. And so I can pull the roster down from Canvas all at once. It helps me push back the grade for each assignment for every student back into the LMS. And it makes it easy to launch from the LMS into Gradescope without needing to know your username or password. We are working on not LTI 2.0, but LTI Advantage to make that integration even more robust. We don't currently work with LMS groups, but that is something that we're exploring. For every LMS, we're trying to look at, are there ways to use the APIs or to use LTI to make this integration deeper and easier for our users? And again, we're getting lots of feedback from our users about different ways to do that. You're going to see the LMS integrations kind of continue to evolve as we find new ways to make it easier and easier, but it already solves what most instructors were asking for, which was roster syncing and grade syncing. The next question here is there a word limit on the feedback that you can give on Gradescope? The answer is no. There's no word limit. I mean, you're going to notice that you know the interface is sort of guiding you towards kind of discrete pieces of feedback. But there's also this area down here, which I didn't really touch on earlier, which is just high-level feedback that you want to give to the student. And I can kind of type as much or as little as I want here. So here's some feedback. And I can sort of, you know, repeat this as many times as I want, and the box will just expand and the student will see it. So there's no limit there. The question that came with it is there a way to attach a document as feedback alongside it? And the answer is we don't allow that right now. That's an interesting request, and we'll kind of add it into the list. And as we hear from users that would help them, you know, that's how it gets prioritized.
All right, thanks everyone. We've gone through all the questions. Oh, no, we got one more question that just came through. Can you add a rubric item for the entire assignment? For example, if you want to apply a penalty for late submission.
Yeah, so right now there's no way to add a rubric item for the entire assignment, but what we encourage in those cases is just to add a question that's associated, you know, not with any particular region of the page. So I would just, you know, add another question down here. It's associated with this blank area, and I'd say late penalty. And I'll say that question is worth 0 points. I'll hit save, and I can apply that late penalty to the students that need it. We have people using Gradescope in all sorts of creative ways related to that type of thing. And again, we're always looking at if there's a common pattern where we have a large group of users using it in a way where they're working around the system, we generally try to make it into a first-class feature. So there's a question here about voice feedback. We do not currently support voice feedback, but that is something we're looking at. Again, that's a thing that is somewhere on this public roadmap where people have voted on it, and it's something that I think is actually becoming a more popular request. So that might be something that gets done sooner. There's a question about if the rubrics are transferable across courses. And the answer is yes. So here, when I click on this thing to add a rubric item, I can also just import the rubric from another assignment in this course or any of my previous courses. So it makes it pretty easy to reuse a rubric. If you're using an entire assignment, you can also just duplicate an assignment as a whole. And so reuse is generally pretty straightforward. There's a question here about compliance with cross-border privacy requirements. And so currently, like today, we have one data center, which is in the United States. We're in the process of going through and getting up and running in a few more regions to make those data privacy requirements easier to comply with. We're already a member of EU-US Privacy Shield, which helps for people over in the EU. And if you're in another region where you have data privacy requirements, like please just let us know, and we're happy to kind of talk that through. Generally speaking, it's pretty straightforward for up and running in any region that has those requirements.
Can you confirm that the student IDs that were shown alongside the names of students in your slides were made up ID numbers?
Yeah, so everything I've shown you today is all fake data, or at least anonymized data. So some of those statistics were derived from a real exam, but we then took them and attached them to fake students and all that stuff. So nothing you saw was any real work. These are all things that we wrote by hand ourselves. These are all, I mean, there are people with the name Melanie Robinson, but we have no idea who they are, and these ID numbers are all fake as well. So everything here is not attached to any real students. Definitely take the privacy issues very, very seriously here.
Do students have to submit individual email opt-ins to receive the email notifications?
No, so the email notifications that come through are only triggered when an instructor takes an action. And so we don't ask the students to opt into those things because they're essentially system notifications. Instructors, for like the only emails we send out to instructors are like product newsletters, and those are opt-in, for example. System notifications are not kind of customizable there.
All right, we do not have any additional questions at this time.
Okay, well, I really appreciate everybody taking the time to join and providing a pretty diverse conversation there. Again, please do feel free to reach out if you have any further questions customized to your institution. My email is here on the screen. It's asing@turnitin.com. And if you want to just get started on your own, gradescope.com, use Meet Gradescope.
We'll also include additional information in a follow-up email, including a copy of a recording of today's webinar. Feel free to share it with colleagues who are unavailable to attend today, and we hope to hear from you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.